Something happened on March 10, 2026, that no scientist, no textbook, and no model built in the last 300 years of physics was prepared for. Not a theory, not a simulation. A real event, recorded by real instruments, verified by independent observatories on 3 separate continents, and it happened in 60 minutes. The span of a lunch break, the length of a single television episode. In that window of time, a 15-kilometer rock, sitting 240 million kilometers from Earth, did something that every framework of cometary science says is physically impossible. And by the time the sun rose over California, the people who understand these systems best had gone completely silent. At 4 UTC, the trajectory analyst on overnight shift at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena was already deep inside the data. Her cursor was mid-scroll through the Deep Space Network's telemetry return from Deep Space Station 43 inches Canberra, Australia. Everything was routine, everything was expected. Then the Doppler shift reading loaded onto her screen, and her hand stopped moving. The velocity change registered at 2.4 kilometers per second, instantaneous. She ran the verification sequence. The number did not change. She did not follow the standard flagging protocol. She picked up the internal direct line and called the senior duty officer personally and said 4 words, "You need to see this." What followed was not panic. It was something quieter and more unsettling than panic. Because within the hour, 3 completely independent detection systems had confirmed the same conclusion using 3 entirely different methodologies. The Gaia spacecraft, currently cataloging the full stellar map of the Milky Way, independently verified the astrometric position shift to within 0.003 arcseconds. The Subaru telescope in Hawaii cross-referenced the optical brightening. 3 instruments, 3 approaches, 1 identical result. By 4:45 UTC, the Coma, the gas cloud surrounding the nucleus, had grown to 1.5 million kilometers in diameter. For context, Jupiter's diameter is 139,820 kilometers. In under an hour, Comet 3I Atlas had built a structure 10 times larger than the biggest planet in our solar system. The room at JPL did not erupt in noise. It went quiet, because every person present understood exactly what that number meant, and none of them had a framework to contain it. Here is where the first wall of physics appears. In a vacuum, gas expanding at 400 kilometers per second cools catastrophically. Temperature should have collapsed toward absolute zero almost instantly. This is not a debated principle. This is the second law of thermodynamics, one of the most tested, most verified, most foundational rules in all of science. Entropy increases, expanding gas cools. Every refrigerator on Earth operates on this exact mechanism. The James Webb Space Telescope's near-infrared instrument was pointed directly at the center of that cloud and returned the opposite result. The core temperature did not drop, it spiked. The infrared spectrum showed the nucleus glowing at 800 Kelvin 500 degrees Celsius. A standard comet nucleus at that distance from the Sun should register around -200 degrees Celsius. The thermal energy required to produce the observed temperature profile inside a 15-kilometer rock at that orbital distance in under 60 minutes is measured in terawatts. That figure represents more energy than the combined nuclear arsenal of every nation on Earth released in a single hour. Natural comets have no internal power source. They are frozen aggregates of ice, silicate rock, and carbon compounds, passive debris left over from planetary formation, drifting through interstellar space for millions or billions of years. The standard model of cometary science, the dirty snowball theory proposed by Harvard astronomer Fred Whipple in 1950, describes these objects clearly. They do not generate heat, they do not steer, they do not accelerate on their own. And yet 3I Atlas accelerated at 2.4 kilometers per second instantaneously. The most powerful chemical rocket engine ever constructed, the F1 engine that propelled the Saturn V toward the Moon, produced non-gravitational acceleration orders of magnitude smaller than what the Deep Space Network just recorded from a comet nucleus. Theoretical models place the absolute upper bound of natural non-gravitational acceleration in cometary physics at approximately 0.00001 meters per second squared. What the Doppler data recorded is not near that boundary. It is not in the same category of physical event at all. 2 hours into the expansion, at 6:15 UTC, The Subaru telescope detected something that existing classification systems have no name for. Every 13.8 minutes, the luminosity of the coma increased by exactly 40%, then dimmed, then increased again. Rhythmic, repeating, precise, not random, not chaotic. A pulse, like a heartbeat measured from 240 million kilometers away. And the moment you apply standard rotational physics to explain it, the explanation collapses. For a 1.5 kilometer body to produce a 13.8-minute light cycle through rotation, it would need to spin fast enough to generate centrifugal forces sufficient to tear the nucleus apart. The tensile strength of ice and silicate rock cannot hold together at that velocity. The object should not exist as an intact structure, and yet the nucleus remained whole. The pulse continued. Every conventional explanation did not struggle to account for this, it simply died on contact with the data. At this point, the entire canon of cometary science, from Whipple's original dirty snowball theory to the most advanced thermodynamic models maintained by NASA's Planetary Defense Coordination Office, had been rendered insufficient. Not challenged, not strained, insufficient. Something was happening inside 3I Atlas that no model in existence could account for. And the next data set was about to make everything worse. The Atacama Large Millimeter Array ALMA is not a single telescope. It is a network of 66 high-precision antennas distributed across the Atacama Plateau in northern Chile, operating at an altitude of 5,000 meters. Above the vast majority of Earth's atmospheric interference, it resolves molecular signatures in deep space with a sensitivity no other ground-based instrument can match. When ALMA produces a spectral reading, that result is not an estimate. It is a precise chemical fingerprint of whatever it is pointed at. At 7 UTC, ALMA completed its spectral analysis of the coma surrounding 3I Atlas, and the fingerprint it returned had never appeared in any comet observation in recorded human history. Ionized titanium, vaporized iron. Pause on those two substances and let the physics settle completely. Titanium does not vaporize until it reaches 3,287 degrees Celsius. Iron does not vaporize until 2,861 degrees. These are not exotic theoretical thresholds. These are the measured boiling points of structural metals, the same materials used in aerospace engineering, in jet turbine blades, in the heat shields of spacecraft built to survive atmospheric re-entry. To vaporize titanium requires conditions comparable to the surface of a small star. It requires the interior of industrial blast furnaces, rocket exhaust plumes, plasma torches used to cut the hardest materials on Earth. The nucleus of 3I Atlas is a 1.5 kilometer rock sitting 240 million kilometers from the Sun. At that orbital distance, the inverse square law of radiative heating, the same physics that explains why Mercury scorches and Neptune freezes, eliminates solar energy as the possible heat source by a margin so enormous it requires no calculation to dismiss. There is no friction in the vacuum of space. There is no known chemical reaction within the standard molecular inventory of a cometary nucleus, water, ice, carbon dioxide, methane, silicate dust, that even approaches the vaporization threshold of iron, let alone titanium. The energy is not arriving from outside the object. Every theoretical model, from multiple independent astrophysical research programs, when confronted with this thermal profile, converges on a single conclusion. The energy source is internal. Something inside 3I Atlas is generating terawatt-scale power output. The Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, upon receiving the ALMA spectral data, launched emergency simulation runs to model any natural mechanism capable of producing this result. Their models return nothing viable, not an unlikely candidate. Nothing viable at all. To understand why this matters so profoundly, consider what we know about natural internal power sources in planetary bodies. On Earth, internal heat comes from two origins: residual thermal energy from planetary accretion 4.6 billion years ago, and ongoing radioactive decay of isotopes like uranium-238, thorium-232, and potassium-40 embedded throughout the mantle and crust. This is the physics driving plate tectonics, keeping Earth's iron core liquid, and generating the magnetosphere that makes life possible. But Earth has a diameter of 12,742 kilometers and a mass of 6 times 10 to the power of 24 kilograms. The radioactive inventory required to sustain that internal heat budget is proportional to that enormous mass. 3. I-Atlas has a nucleus estimated at 15 kilometers. Its mass, under standard cometary density assumptions, is negligible by any planetary comparison. The radioactive decay model cannot produce terawatt output from an object that's small, not even theoretically close. A natural georeactor, a theoretical phenomenon in which fissile material concentrates sufficiently to sustain a nuclear chain reaction, has been proposed as a possible internal energy source for certain large planetary bodies. The Harvard simulation team did not include it as a candidate mechanism for 3I Atlas. The conditions required for natural criticality inside a 15-kilometer comet nucleus are so far outside any modeled parameter space that pursuing the idea was not considered scientifically productive. The data does not fit any natural model. That is not a rhetorical position taken for dramatic effect. That is the documented output of the most sophisticated astrophysical modeling infrastructure our civilization has ever constructed. Then, at 9:12 UTC, the Hubble Space Telescope's Wide Field Camera 3 completed its calibration pass over the object. The image it returned was immediately classified by the relevant federal agency, but the raw data stream had already been transmitted to the Minor Planet Center servers, and it had already been seen. Inside the Coma, at the geometric center of the Jupiter-scale cloud surrounding the nucleus, there was a ring, not a debris ring, not a dust halo, a coherent, luminous torus of plasma, exactly 2,000 kilometers in diameter, holding its shape against the outward pressure of a gas cloud expanding at 800 kilometers per second. Plasma does not form stable rings without magnetic confinement. This is not a theoretical statement. It is the foundational engineering principle behind every fusion reactor program on Earth, from the tokamak design, pioneered at the Kurchatov Institute in Moscow, to the ITER project, currently under construction in southern France. Plasma is ionized gas, matter in a state where electrons have been stripped from their atomic nuclei by extreme heat, creating a fluid of charged particles that responds to electromagnetic fields. Unconfined plasma expands and disperses. Holding plasma in a defined geometric shape requires a magnetic field of sufficient strength and precise geometry to exert inward force exactly equal to the thermal pressure pushing outward. This is hydrostatic equilibrium achieved not through gravity, but through electromagnetism. 3I Atlas is generating a magnetic field measured at 40 Gauss. Earth's surface magnetic field averages 0.5 Gauss. This object, a 15-kilometer nucleus with no detectable iron core, no liquid metal interior, no planetary dynamo mechanism of any kind identifiable by our instruments, is producing a magnetic field 80 times stronger than Earth's. A magnetic field of 40 Gauss confining a plasma torus 2,000 kilometers in diameter, while simultaneously sustaining a Jupiter-scale coma against the solar wind, does not have a natural explanation. The energy budget required to maintain that field strength, at that spatial scale, sustained and stable for the hours it had now been continuously observed, is orders of magnitude beyond any natural electromagnetic phenomenon ever associated with a cometary body in the complete observational record of modern astronomy. But the plasma torus is not merely a structural anomaly to catalog and study. In the physics of magnetic confinement, a plasma ring within a toroidal magnetic field functions as a particle accelerator. Charged particles trapped inside the torus are accelerated along the field lines. They gain energy with each circuit they complete. They produce synchrotron radiation electromagnetic emissions at specific frequencies determined by the field, strength, and the energy of the particles. And under the right field geometry, they can be focused and directed outward along the magnetic axis of the torus, beamed in two opposing directions, perpendicular to the ring plane. At 9:47 UTC, the Green Bank Telescope in West Virginia, a 100-meter aperture radio observatory operated by the National Radio Astronomy Observatory, detected a signal at 1,420 MHz. The operators ran source verification immediately, assuming terrestrial radio frequency interference. The source resolved unambiguously to the coordinates of 3I Atlas. Within 30 minutes, ESA's radio monitoring network independently confirmed the signal. The FAST telescope in China, the 500-meter aperture spherical telescope, currently the largest single-dish radio observatory on Earth, confirmed it a third time. The signal is narrowband, it is modulated, and it is repeating a sequence. The sequence is 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, followed by a pause, followed by the identical sequence again. Those are prime numbers, and prime numbers are not produced by any known natural astrophysical process. Pulsars emit at regular intervals, but they produce broadband noise, not narrowband mathematical sequences. Quasars are cosmologically distant and spectrally distinct from anything inside our own solar system. No natural electromagnetic source produces a narrowband transmission at the hydrogen line carrying a structured mathematical series. Not once, not ever. Not in the entire history of radio astronomy. The hydrogen line 1420.405 MHz is not an arbitrary frequency. It is the emission frequency of neutral hydrogen atoms transitioning between their two lowest quantum energy states, governed by the hyperfine interaction between electron and proton spins. Hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. It is the frequency that SETI, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, has monitored continuously since Project ALMA in 1960, specifically because any technological civilization with a working understanding of atomic physics would recognize it as a universal reference frequency. Frank Drake, who initiated the first systematic SETI search, chose the hydrogen line for a precise reason. It is the one frequency that requires no cultural context to understand. It is written into the quantum structure of the universe itself, and it means the same thing regardless of where in the cosmos you evolved. In 65 years of radio, astronomy, and SETI monitoring, no coherent narrowband mathematical signal has ever been received from an object inside our own solar system. 3. IATLAS is now broadcasting one from 240 million kilometers away, and the signal is not static. The 13.8-minute rhythmic pulse first detected by the Subaru telescope is intensifying. The Parkes Observatory in Australia, tracking the object continuously, confirms that each successive pulse is measurably stronger than the one before it. The magnetic field intensity is rising. The Coma is still expanding. At the documented rate of growth, astrometric projection models indicate that the outer boundary of the cloud will reach the orbital radius of Mars within 4 hours of the initial expansion event. Every data point compounds the one that came before it. Every instrument confirms what the previous instrument measured. Every natural explanation fails at its first contact with the actual numbers. The object expanded beyond Jupiter's diameter inside a single hour. It heated its nucleus to temperatures capable of vaporizing structural metals. It generated a magnetic field stronger than Earth's, from a body with no dynamo mechanism of any kind. It confined plasma into a geometrically precise torus. And it broadcast a prime number sequence on the exact frequency that the entire scientific framework of SETI was constructed to detect. What is happening is not ambiguous in its data. It is ambiguous only in its explanation. And the explanation that science has always offered, coincidence, natural variation, undiscovered mechanism, is being dismantled, point by point, with each new instrument reading that comes in. The Harvard simulation team found nothing viable. The JPL trajectory models have no category for a 2-4 kilometer per second instantaneous velocity change from a passive rocky body. The thermodynamic models cannot produce 800 Kelvin from a nucleus at that solar distance. Every branch of expertise that has been brought to bear on this object has returned the same answer, not a partial answer, not an uncertain answer, a flat, documented failure to account for what is being observed. The single most significant unresolved question, the one that the Goldstone Deep Space Communications Complex data raises, and that no simulation from any institution has yet answered, is this. The gas cloud is not expanding randomly. It does not exhibit the chaotic dispersal pattern of an explosion. The Doppler radar return from Goldstone shows the cloud moving outward in concentric spherical shells. Shell 1 at 400 kilometers per second, Shell 2 at 600. Shell 3 at 800, each released in precise sequence, each accelerating at a linear rate. The spacing between them is exact to a degree that chaos theory cannot reproduce. This is not the aftermath of a collision. This is not a random physical event. This is a sequence deliberate, ordered, and expanding outward through space. The question is no longer what mechanism produced the shells. The question is what the sequence is designed to do. Because everything observed about 3I Atlas points toward design, not in the rhetorical sense, not as metaphor, but in the engineering sense. Systems that generate structured outputs don't arise from randomness. Concentric shells accelerating at linear intervals are not an accident of cometary physics. A plasma torus holding perfect geometric form inside an expanding gas cloud is not a natural coincidence. A narrowband signal on the hydrogen line transmitting prime numbers is not background noise. Each of these phenomena, in isolation, would represent an extraordinary anomaly demanding years of study. Together, arriving simultaneously from a single 5-kilometer object, they form something that the scientific community has not yet publicly named, but that every instrument pointed at 3I Atlas is describing in perfect agreement. Return to the ALMA spectral data for a moment. Ionized titanium and vaporized iron floating inside a Jupiter-scale coma. Titanium vaporizes at 3,287 degrees Celsius. Iron at 2,861. These temperatures are found in industrial blast furnaces, in rocket exhaust plumes, in plasma cutting equipment, not in the coma of a comet 240 million kilometers from any significant heat source. The energy required to produce those molecular signatures is internal, and it is operating at terawatt scale from a nucleus, with no identified power source. The Harvard-Smithsonian team modeled every candidate mechanism and returned nothing viable. The energy is there. Its origin, by every natural framework available, does not exist. Then consider the magnetic field. 40 Gauss from a 15-kilometer body with no iron core, no liquid interior, no dynamo mechanism. Earth's field generated by a planet with a diameter of 12,742 kilometers, a liquid iron outer core, and convection currents driven by billions of years of accumulated thermal energy, averages 0.5 Gauss at the surface. 3I Atlas is producing a field 80 times stronger from a structure smaller than most large cities. That field is sustaining a plasma torus 2,000 kilometers in diameter, holding it in perfect geometric shape against the outward thermal pressure of a rapidly expanding gas cloud. In fusion engineering, this is what controlled confinement looks like. This is what you build when you want to accelerate particles, focus energy, and direct output along a defined axis. What 3I Atlas has built, by every measurable parameter, matches the functional description of a particle accelerator operating at a scale our civilization cannot approach. And then the signal. The Green Bank telescope, confirmed by ESA's monitoring network, confirmed again by FAST, the largest single-dish radio telescope on Earth, all resolving the same narrowband transmission at 1,420.405 MHz. The hydrogen line, the frequency chosen by the founders of SETI precisely because it transcends cultural and biological context. The frequency written into the quantum physics of the most abundant element in the universe. The signal carrying a sequence of prime numbers, the mathematical structures that exist independently of any physical system, that cannot be generated by thermal noise or plasma dynamics or rotational mechanics, that represent, in the framework of information theory, the simplest possible proof of structured intent. In 65 years of monitoring that frequency, humanity has never received a coherent mathematical transmission from inside its own solar system. The WOW signal of 1977 came from outside. The candidate signals logged over decades of SETI observation came from outside. 3I Atlas is inside at 240 million kilometers, between Earth and the asteroid belt, and it is broadcasting. The pulse is intensifying with each 13.8-minute interval. The magnetic field is strengthening. The coma is still growing. The shells are still expanding outward in their precise, linear, accelerating sequence. Every data point, from every instrument, tells the same story. The object is not decaying. It is not dispersing. It is activating systematically, measurably, and in a direction that every projection model now agrees is oriented toward the inner solar system. The question science has always asked about objects like this is, what is it? That question has been answered. The instruments answered it, the thermodynamics answered it, the spectral analysis answered it, the signal answered it. The question, now the one that no institution has yet addressed publicly, the one sitting inside the data from Goldstone and Green Bank and ALMA and Hubble, is simpler and far more consequential. What comes next, and whether what is unfolding was always the plan. If this story unsettled you, if it made you question what you thought you knew about the boundaries of the natural world, share it. The data is real. The physics is documented. And the people who need to be asking these questions out loud are not just the scientists in those rooms. They are everyone watching this. Subscribe for every update as this situation develops, because what 3i Atlas does in the next 24 hours may change everything we think we understand about what is out there and how long it has known we are here.